Anyone who truly knows me knows that I like spending time with myself. It is in these moments that I have some of the most meaningful conversations. It is at such times that I reflect on my experiences and try to make sense of them. It is at these times that I ask questions and dive deep to understand the why. Recently, I found myself just watching people, not judging, just observing. The way people move, the way they speak, the way they carry themselves depending on where they are, who they are around, and what they believe that they have. And a series of questions started forming in my mind. Not one, but many. Why does a man who already has money still want power? Why does someone who already has influence still feel the need to control more? Why does a man change the moment he is placed in a position of authority? Why is it that the same person you struggle with, the same person you hustle with, the same person who knew you when things were hard, can look at you differently the moment they get a title? Why does recognition become selective? Why does humility disappear? Why does access suddenly feel like privilege? And I'm not talking theory here. I've seen this personally. I've seen men I walked with, men I struggled with, men who knew exactly where we came from get promoted and start moving like we were strangers immediately. Same face, different energy. So now I had to ask myself something real. What exactly is happening here? Is this power? Or is this something else being revealed? And before we distance ourselves from all this, before we say that's them, we have to ask something uncomfortable. How many times have we done the same thing in smaller ways? How many times have we carried ourselves differently depending on who was watching, depending on what we had, depending on how we wanted to be seen? I've lived long enough and I've seen enough across different environments to know that what we call power doesn't behave the way we think it does. I've seen men sit in positions of power who had none before. I've seen men feared by many who were not even in control of themselves. I've seen men chase rank, not to serve, but to feel important. And I've seen what happens to them, not only when the position is gone, but what happens to the organization or the institution, even the society, while they are in it. Because when a man or woman sits in a position he or she does not have the capacity to carry, it is not just them that is exposed. Everything under them begins to feel it. Decisions becomes unstable, standards begins to drop, confusion replaces clarity, and people start losing trust, not just in the individual, but in the structure itself. And over time, the damage is not always loud, but it is always cumulative. Morale begins to drop, trust begins to erode, standards begin to quietly shift until dysfunction starts to feel normal. And by the time people realize something is wrong, the structure has already adapted to the weakness, because the problem is never just the position. The problem is who is occupying it. Look at politics, for instance. It is said that politics is a nasty game. I remember one politician saying that politics has a morality of its own. But does it? Or is it that the character of those who occupy these positions is what gives such a noble profession an ugly stain? But we'll come back to that, because I've seen this same pattern in different environments. During my years as a police officer, I worked around some of the hardest criminals you could imagine. And there was something I noticed that most people never expected. There were levels to that world. You had the subordinates, the ones trying to make a name for themselves, the ones speaking loudly, acting aggressively, sharing stories of how brutal, how grimy, how tough, how dangerous they were. And then you had the leaders, the real ones. And what stood out to me was not what they did, but how they carried themselves. The loud ones needed recognition, needed to be seen, needed to prove, needed to dominate, which means they were not operating from power. They were operating from lack. And lack always makes noise. I guess this is what was meant by the quote about empty vessels. But the leaders, They were calm, measured. They didn't talk much. They easily complied with instructions. They didn't try to prove anything because they didn't need to. And that's when something started to shift in my understanding. What most people call power is dependency disguised as authority. Because if you need to be seen, you are dependent on others. If you need to dominate, you are dependent on submission. If you need to prove, you are dependent on belief. And anything that depends on others is not power. Then life showed me something else. In the course of my job, I had responsibility for the personal security of VIPs, government officials, and other high-level individuals, and that gave me a perspective most people never get. I got to observe politicians not from a distance, but up close. Not just what they present publicly, but who they are in real moments. And I noticed something that was hard to ignore. When they were in office, most of them carried themselves differently. They walked like they were above people, aloof. They spoke like they already knew everything. They acted like acknowledgement was optional. But then I saw what happened when they left office. Say, man, now we greeting you in the street, calling you like your friends, acknowledging your presence. And I had to ask myself again, what changed? It wasn't the man, it was the position. Which means whatever he was expressing before was never his. It was borrowed. And if it can be taken away, it was never power. Then I saw it again inside the police service. A structured system, ranks, authority, hierarchy. And I saw people chase rank, not because they were ready to carry responsibility, since many of these said people avoided responsibility, but because they wanted to feel powerful. I saw men who were clearly incompetent, ill-disciplined and incapable pursue position as if their life depended on it. And many of them got there, they got through. Now you may wonder, how is that even possible? How do people who are less competent, less prepared, less disciplined end up in positions of authority? And it's simple. It's simply because the traits that get a man into position are not always the traits required to function in it. Ambition can elevate a man. Drive can push him forward. Persistence can open doors. But none of those guarantee sound judgment, emotional control, or the capacity to carry responsibility. So what happens is this. A man rises based on his ability to pursue, but is then required to perform based on his ability to carry. And if he does not have the capacity, the position begins to expose him. And this is the main reason why we have square pegs in wrong holes. Not because the system doesn't have structure, or as I stated earlier, not because politics has a morality of its own, but because the wrong men are sitting in it. Now they have authority, but not the capacity. And that's when the system begins to suffer. Because when a man needs position to feel powerful, he is already powerless without it. When a man needs fear to be respected, he is already weak without it. When a man changes the moment the power is given to him, that means power did not reveal him, it exposed him. And then we come to something we've all been taught. We've been taught that knowledge is power. But I had to challenge that too. Because I've met men who were highly educated, who could explain anything, who understood systems, who understood law, who understood psychology. But when pressure came, they couldn't hold themselves. I've met men who didn't have all the words, but they stood firm. So I had to ask again, if knowledge is power, then what was this? And I realized, knowledge can inform you, but it cannot anchor you. And a man who is not anchored may know everything, but still have no power. So now I have to redefine it for myself. Fear can make people comply. Fear can make people obey. Fear can even make people submit. But fear cannot make people respect. Fear cannot make people align. Fear cannot make people become. So what fear gives you is temporary control, not power. Because the moment fear is removed, everything collapses, which means it was never power. It was dependency. So what is power then? Power is alignment with your nature. When something is aligned with its nature, it operates effortlessly. Look at the sun, for instance. It does not try to shine. The ocean does not try to be deep. Gravity does not try to pull. It simply is. And when a man is aligned, he doesn't force presence. He simply walks with it. He doesn't demand respect. He exudes respect naturally. He doesn't chase control. He embodies stability. So after everything I've seen across the streets, across institutions, across positions, I had to accept something uncomfortable. Power is one of the most misunderstood things in this world. Because what most people spend their lives chasing is not power at all. It is the appearance of it. And that's when it all came together for me. Most people don't want power. They want the feeling of being powerful. And position gives them that feeling. But because it is not rooted within them, they have to perform it. That's why they become arrogant. That's why they become dismissive. That's why they become inflated. Because they are trying to match the role externally without having the substance internally. So now I understand something clearly. You don't pursue power, you develop capacity. You don't chase position, you become stable enough to carry it. You don't seek authority, you embody clarity and control, because in the end, power is not what you are given. Power is what remains when everything you were given is gone. Because life has a way of stripping everything that is not real. And when it does, only what is built within you remains. If your heart intends to truly be someone of power, here are 5 simple directives to help you get there. 1. Stop chasing positions that make you feel important, but instead, build the capacity to carry responsibility. Position will always test you. It will expose your patience, your discipline, your judgment, your ability to lead under pressure. So instead of asking, how do I get there? Start asking, if I were placed here today, would I have to perform, or could I truly carry it without collapsing? 2. Learn to control yourself, because if you cannot govern your own mind, you cannot govern anything else. Pay attention to your reactions, your anger, your need to respond, your need to prove, because every time you are triggered and lose control, you are being ruled by something outside of you. Power begins the moment you can pause, assess, and choose your response instead of reacting automatically. 3. Do not confuse fear, noise, or recognition with power. Those are signs of dependency. If people only listen to you because they fear you, remove the fear and watch what remains. If you need to raise your voice to be heard, then your presence alone is not enough. Real power does not need to announce itself. It is felt, not forced. 4. Develop internal stability, because that is the only thing that will remain when everything external changes. Titles will change, positions will come and go, people will treat you differently depending on where you stand. But your ability to remain grounded, to think clearly, act wisely, and stay composed, that is what sustains you when everything else shifts. 5. Become the same person in every environment, because consistency is the mark of real power. Whether you are in uniform or out of it, in position or out of position, respected or ignored, remain the same. Because if your behavior changes based on your environment, then your identity is still being controlled by it. And a man controlled by his environment does not yet have power. So now the question becomes simple. If everything you rely on to feel powerful was taken away, who would you be? Because whatever remains, that is your power. This talk is dedicated to Lieutenant Derek Allen, a man who, from a very early stage in my life, embodied discipline, integrity, and excellence at a level I have rarely since seen. Before I understood what power was, I saw it lived through him. This is a sacred curriculum. Lesson complete. Now, remember who you are.